So we have evidence of violence at the beginning of the flood. But we also see evidence in the recessional phase of the flood. In Genesis 8:3, it says the waters receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days the waters decreased. This adverb steadily is actually two verbs in the Hebrew, and they are two of the most common verbs in the Hebrew. They are the verb to go and the verb to return. So the waters, literally, the waters are receding, going, and returning in Hebrew. This is moving water. As the waters are receding, they're moving. What does moving water do? It carries sediments. And so in the recessional phase of the flood, the waters are going to be moving. Some of the sediments that were deposited in the first half of the flood are going to be moved somewhere else. Psalm 104 also alludes to the flood. Many people say this is a creation passage, this whole psalm. But I don't think so. I think if we look carefully at verses 8 and 9, it is talking about the flood. It says that the mountains rose and the valleys sank down to the place which you established for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass over, so that they will not return to cover the earth. If that's referring to the third day of creation when God made dry land, then the flood was a violation of that statement. I think that is a statement about the flood. And it tells us that the land mass, the crust of the earth, shifted in the recessional stage of the flood. And so the mountains rose and the valleys sank. Now, if you combine earthquakes and volcanoes, like the earthquake that we saw in Turkey a few years ago, with floods, like the one in Nicaragua a few years ago, you are going to have a catastrophe of unimaginable magnitude. Now look at that water. Wouldn't you like to just take a cup and just scoop in there and get a drink? Why does it look so brown? It looks brown because it's carrying sediments. And if we could do a stop-action cut through that water, we would find that that water is not just carrying microscopic particles of silt and maybe some sand grains. It's carrying boulders. And that house didn't last very long, I'm sure. And so the flood was a violent, violent catastrophe. All of the plant materials ripped up off the land. All the land creatures were drowned in the flood, taken from whatever they were hanging on to, and there was massive, massive erosion and sedimentation going on. Then there's the depth of the flood. The Bible tells us how deep it was in Genesis 7. It says, the waters prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. Now, let's suppose that we're all mountains in here, and let's suppose that this little thing here is like Elijah's jar, or was it Elisha, the jar of oil that never ran out. And I start pouring water on the mountains down here. What's going to happen? Well, the water's just going to pile up on top of their head, isn't it? No. It's water seeks a level plane. It's going to run down the shoulders. And so if I want to cover this mountain, I'm going to have to cover a lot of other mountains. But I'm a mountain too, so I've got to keep pouring to cover me. But we got a problem. The doors in the auditorium here are not watertight. The water's going to leak out the doors. It's going to go down the road to the campground here. And then it's going to go down the roads to Harrison. And so I'm going to have to pour a lot of water just to get this mountain covered. The only way to get all the high mountains under heaven covered is a global flood. Those who believe in a local flood believe that it was in the Mesopotamian valley. And to believe in a local flood, you've got to believe in something like this. Now, this is not an actual photograph. This is an artistic design by one of our artists in our office. No such flood really exists in the world, never has. The only way you could have a flood like this is if God put his hands around all that water and kept it all contained. There's a problem with that view, though. There's nothing in the text of Genesis that says God did any kind of supernatural action like that. On the contrary, the whole text of the flood account is going out of its way to tell us he didn't do anything like that he was destroying the whole world. Then finally, for this discussion, the rainbow promise. In Genesis 9, we have the promise that God will never again send the flood on the earth, and the rainbow is the sign of that promise. This passage is one of those passages that causes